Dear Prime Minister Rutte, dear Ambassador van Roden, dear Excellencies, dear members of the faculty, dear students and guests, I would like to welcome you all here to the Hertie School today. We are truly honored to have you with us, Mr. Prime Minister, and Europe and the world are indeed in an age of uncertainty, as the title of your speech suggests. 2 days ago, the word Krisenmodus, crisis mode, was elected Word of the Year in Germany. I suspect it describes political life rather well. The ongoing wars in Ukraine and the Middle East demand our urgent attention. Authoritarianism is gaining support, and liberal democratic institutions are hollowed out in many countries. Migration and its effects have shaped political debates across Europe and beyond. The climate crisis is growing more acute, and we will have to wait for the conclusions of the negotiation at the COP28 in Dubai to know how far a multilateral effort will manage to meet this challenge. Against the backdrop of crises and tensions, 2 billion people prepare to vote next year in 70 different elections, from India to the US to our own European elections. As you come towards the end of your time in national politics, as the longest-serving minister in Dutch history, it seems very appropriate in time to reflect and discuss Europe as an actor in these uncertain times. You have personally played an important role in the EU's response to all of these crises over the past 13 years. You have witnessed firsthand how difficult it is to create a consensus within Europe to confront them. This might only get more difficult next year in a potentially even more fragmented European Parliament, where it will become even harder to build coalitions. Building coalitions in difficult political circumstances is certainly an area you have some first-hand experience with as well, and now your successors are struggling with it in The Hague. We very much look forward to learning from your and discussing your experiences and your vision for Europe in a fractured world. The Hertie School is exactly the right place to do this. We care deeply about European policy and politics. Our Jacques Delors Center is among the foremost research centers and think tanks in the field in Berlin, and many of our students decide to focus on the EU in their studies. Our Center for International Security leads the way in putting questions of international security and grand strategy on the agenda in Berlin. The Hertie School is the university of the social science and the professional public policy school in Berlin to drive these questions through research and learning. We are dedicated to intellectual and practical exchange between science, politics, business, and civil society, working together to find the best solutions for the common good. We are committed to bringing together all those who must be on the table and involved in making Europe more secure, greener, and prosperous. This is why I'm delighted to see so many people in the audience today, and so many of our students in particular. We want you, dear students, to combine the insights of statesmen like Prime Minister Rutte with your experience from different professional, academic, and personal backgrounds to allow you to shape all of the policies and politics for our future. In particular, I see many of the members of Future EU, a group of students engaged on topics of European politics, and I know you're eager to ask many of your questions to the Prime Minister directly. So thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister, for not only sharing your vision, but also accepting to answer all of these questions from the future generation here in the audience. And with that said, please give a warm round of applause and welcome to Prime Minister Rutte.
Madam President Wol, students, and let me first of all say I'm impressed by the turnout, despite exam week. So many of you have signed up today, so I'm really honored for that. I would like to make a few introductory remarks, and then let's go into the discussion with you, because that's always the most rewarding part. 5 years ago, and it was just a short distance from here, I gave a speech at the Bertelsmann Stiftung. And at the time, we were in the middle, and this seems ages ago, in the middle of the Brexit negotiations. And that day I was asked to deliver a speech about Europe, about the importance of the EU meeting the basic needs of all Europeans. So I spoke about prosperity, about security, about stability. And now 5 years have passed, 5.5 years, and the world has indeed changed dramatically. But the striking thing is that I could almost give exactly the same speech here today. I'm not going to do that, I promise you, because there is still only one solution to the big issues of our time. And that one issue and that one solution is cooperation. And of course, I don't need to explain that to you. More than half of the current students at the Hertie School have come from abroad to study here. And if you include the alumni, there are more than 95 countries represented at this school, which is very impressive. So for me, and I hope also for you, the Hertie School is clear proof that you can achieve success when you join forces at the international level. Yes, that might sound obvious. But these days, we can no longer assume that everyone agrees on this point. The main topic on our agenda 5 years ago, Brexit, was in those days a clear illustration of that. But you can see it elsewhere in Europe too. And what I've learned in my 30 years as Prime Minister is that we absolutely always need each other in Europe. On all the big issues we face, Europe's task now is to close ranks on stability, on security, on also migration. All these topics which all demand a Europe-wide approach. And fortunately, that's exactly what these issues can count on getting. Migration is, I believe, currently one of the biggest issues in Europe, including in the Netherlands. Not only was it the issue that brought down the Dutch government last summer, it also played a big role in the then happening recent elections. And yet, over the years, I've learned that when it comes to migration, the only path forward is the common path. In 2016, Chancellor Angela Merkel and I myself concluded a deal with Turkey on the reception of Syrian refugees in that country. And that helped us then to deal with the acute crisis. But for me, the bigger lesson was, we can succeed if we work together. Of course, this didn't immediately solve the whole problem. Europe is still receiving more migrants than it can handle. In the last couple of years, the problem has become bigger. But I firmly believe that we can get migration under control if all the EU countries work together. If we make agreements with countries of origin. If we work to create future prospects for people in those countries. And if we make sure that migrants with no right to stay actually return to their countries. That won't be easy, but it is possible if everyone in Europe shows unity. The same unity we need for Ukraine. Since Russia's brutal invasion last year, and I know that we are next to the Russian Cultural Institute, which is a bit empty at the moment. But since Russia's brutal invasion last year, the EU has closed ranks in support for Ukraine. And by no means everyone expected that. Putin certainly didn't. He had counted on a divided Europe that was unable to respond to this aggression. He was wrong. The lessons Europe learned after the Second World War still resonate in the here and now. Peace, security and freedom can never be taken for granted. What happened on the 22nd, 23rd of February last year shows this. They require our enduring commitment. Ever since war broke out in Ukraine, the EU has been putting that principle into reality, into practice. It has put together sanctions packages that are unprecedented in scope. and Germany and the Netherlands are supporting Ukraine with enormous financial and military resources. And by the way, I think the current German government deserves more credit for that. We do this because we are united in the conviction that the price of peace and stability is always worth paying, in any country and on any continent. In the summer of 2014, I felt the collective power of the EU when flight MH17 was shot down over Ukraine by a Russian Buk missile. 298 people lost their lives in the disaster, including 196 Dutch nationals. For the Netherlands and for all the next of kin, it was crucial that those responsible be brought to justice. And it was only thanks to the unfailing support of our allies in Europe, the United States and elsewhere in the world that this matter remained on the international agenda up to today. And for us, as a relatively small country, the Netherlands is the 5th biggest economy in the 27 European Union, but we are relatively smaller, obviously, than Germany and France, for example. For us, it was one of those moments when you realize just how important it is that you are part of something bigger, that you are not on your own, that you are not alone. And I could name many other moments when Europe has faced times of trial. Every country has its own stories and its own history as part of the European Union history. And however different our stories may be, the core truth remains the same. We need each other, we can't do it alone, and most importantly, we don't have to do it alone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have the coffee. This is the comfortable part where the coffee comes and where we can open for discussion. And thank you so much for reserving the biggest part of your intervention today for the questions from the audience. We know that some may have prepared questions. I would like to open it up here. If you're a little bit hesitant, I can fill in, but I already see a hand up, so I'm reassured to see we can
see the quality of the school.
Maybe we'll take questions in pairs, but the mic will go around and we'll start. I see 2 hands, 3 hands, so let's start here and then work our way back, yes. And please present yourself as well.
Yeah, thank you, Prime Minister Rutte. My name is Floris Vissering. I'm a Dutch second-year student at the Hertie School and also a board member of Future EU Student Club. My question has to do with the expansion of the European Union. It seems as though these days there's a very geopolitical, instrumental perspective on EU expansion, perhaps similar to some Cold War logic, where we think that handing out the gains of the internal market will somehow create political agreement. And to me, it seems that even within the EU right now, we see that doesn't work fully. For example, in the case of Hungary, blocking some of the sanctions against Russia. So my question is, don't we risk with expanding the EU that we also create a more divided and ineffective EU?
That's a great question, because at the core of the question is this issue whether expanding the EU should involve more arguments than only the argument it should involve, which is that a country wants to join the EU and genuinely has that ambition. In my country, this has been a huge debate for years, and I'm so happy that I think 2 years ago, Parliament and Cabinet agreed on a way forward, which is based on the principles of strict and fair, and no shortcuts. But at the same time, when a country is up to taking a next step in terms of accession, we should do it. And therefore taking out this constant political issue, yes, they are not ready yet, but we should do it because of China or Russia, or if they are getting in sooner than they should, then probably they will then hopefully change for the better, and you never know. And what I'm very happy about is that the European Commission has also taken this on board. So, for example, on Thursday, Friday in the European Council, we will discuss the enlargement proposals by the European Commission. And they diligently assessed, for example, on Moldova and, of course, Ukraine, where they are. And their conclusion is, and I think it is a conclusion which is absolutely there and should be there, and we should also take that decision for Ukraine and Moldova to take the next step. That doesn't mean that they are entering the European Union next year. It doesn't mean that unanimity will not be involved in all the future debates and discussions, but this is exactly what we need. Strict, fair, no shortcuts. And yes, obviously, if you live in Ukraine, in Kiev these days, and you have that European perspective ambition, you will be happy that Ukraine is taking that next step. But if Volodymyr Zelensky had not been able over the last 12 months to really fulfill the requirements to take that next step, we would not have done it. The fact that we do doesn't mean that we think, okay, they are not there, but let's do it. No, it means that, yes, fine for them because they want it, but it is also possible. They have fulfilled the requirements. And that's exactly what we need. Otherwise, this always becomes political. And when it becomes political, you get shortcuts. And the one is angry, the other is happy. And in the end, you might end up in countries joining which are not really yet there. And I'm not mentioning any names because then they hate me, but there's always that risk.
Thank you. There was a question just 2 lines back, 2 rows back.
Hi, good morning. My name is Sasha Steiner. I'm a policy fellow at the Jacques Delors Center and a Hertie School alumna. And my question is about the defense spending in the Netherlands. For the past 10 years, the Netherlands has been running short on reaching the 2% GDP. The spike was only, I guess, last year after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. In light of a change in the NATO leadership and your potential role in this change. Have you changed your mind about this 2% GDP and whether a country and all European countries should invest more and whether there should be a revision of the 2% GDP to maybe a higher ceiling? Thank you.
You're absolutely right. The Netherlands has not been fulfilling the requirements till a couple of years ago. And when after the 2021 elections, we decided in forming a new coalition to add another 3 billion defense spending, which did not bring us to the 2%. And after the invasion of Russia into Ukraine, this very much unprovoked war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine, we added another somewhat building, 2 billion plus something, but in total it brings us to the 2%. Which is, of course, what we pledged to do in Wales. So we are just in time, almost just in time there. We have seen the very impressive speech by Olaf Scholz in the Bundestag on the Saturday or Sunday. I think it was on the Saturday or Sunday after the Russian invasion, where he pledged 100 billion. The Zeitenwende, I believe it was the phrase he used. And we see it in many other countries also, that we are now increasing the speed by which we achieve the 2%. On NATO SecGen, I made a mistake in a radio interview in October. So after 13 years in this job, you still make mistakes. And the mistake was that I spoke about a possible SecGen ship for me, Secretary General. And I'm absolutely not sure whether it will happen. And I decided not to say anything about it and not add to the mistake I made. But I'm not going to retract what I said there, because what I said was obviously what I meant to say, but I should not have said it. Because typically you should only speak about this when things are done. And this is absolutely not a done case, because there are also others interested, and let's the best man or woman win. We will see what happens. But this is not connected to that, because these decisions were made in 21 and in 22 and in early 23. There was also this option for me to get the job, and that was impossible because that would have led to new elections in the Netherlands. But then in July the cabinet toppled, collapsed, new elections, so new situation.
Thank you very much for this honest answer. It's always very nice to hear from mistakes because that's what we can learn from. I see a hand here on the left.
And then you still make them. That's the problem. It's such a difficult job.
Casper, the mic is in the back, and then we'll come to you right after, I think. We'll do it
Yes,
this way.
thank you. My name is Virgil. I'm also a second-year MIA student, and
And where you're from yourself?
from Romania.
Romania.
And the question is regarding also Romania and Bulgaria and the accession to Schengen area, because we were discussing about enlargement, about criteria, and Romania and Bulgaria fulfill the criteria to join Schengen, but still your government vetoed it last year, the entrance. Can you explain me why this happened?
Well, the interesting thing is that this whole principle of strict and fair and no shortcuts also concerns Schengen. And as you know, Bulgaria and Romania are not yet in Schengen. So last year, based on all the facts, we decided for Romania to agree with accession to Schengen. Then Austria still blocked Romania, and we were still blocking Bulgaria. At the moment, Bulgaria is making absolutely huge progress towards Schengen accession. We are not sure yet whether they are there. We will have to await the last results from the Schengen evaluation and monitoring mechanism, which is now taking place. And I very much hope that soon we can have a positive decision by my country, also for Bulgaria to join Schengen. But we have to await the last results. We have to see the next couple of weeks. So we are really making progress here. And I agree that this question for some years has also been a political issue. And that is because we had a debate in the Dutch parliament 2 years ago and decided on strict, fair, no shortcuts. That in that spirit, also for Schengen, we needed to really take the steps. And then I discussed, for example, with Klaus Iohannis, the Romanian president, last year at length. And we said, okay, we need a new assessment by the Commission on whether Romania is there in terms of rule of law, tick in the box. Second, you need to see whether it has been implemented, is really happening. This is the Schengen evaluation and monitoring mechanism taking place last year, tick in the box. And then we decided on yes for Romania, not yet yes for Bulgaria. I hope this year we have to see the last results coming out of this mission.
Thank you. I think the mic is in the front now as well.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Casper, also a Dutch student here at the Hertie School. And I'm wondering what the future holds for the Netherlands in the EU, because a couple of weeks ago, the elections were won by a quite Eurosceptic populist party, the PVV, often even flirts with an exit, so the Netherlands out of the EU. And you yourself were a bit more Eurosceptic back in 2010, when you started, not seeing many more benefits than the free market aspect. But eventually you became one of the most influential leaders in the EU, behind the German Chancellor and the French President. And you also stressed the importance of cooperation in your speech just now. Still, after your resignation, during the campaign period of the recent elections, the EU cooperation was almost never discussed in the debates or in general on TV. Even though the EU decisions are important for the domestic campaign topics like migration, bestaanszekerheid, climate, etc. How is it possible that in the Netherlands, a country for which the EU is quite important, the topic was not discussed at all in recent elections? And how did your time, 13 years as leader of the Netherlands, open the door for a populist party, Eurosceptic party, to win these elections?
Yeah. Well, first the elections, then me, then the Populist Party. So 3 elements. First about the elections, I mean, it is the one setting up the debates, and then of course the participants in the debates who decide what the topics will be. And many topics have not been discussed. I agree with you that I also raised an eyebrow when I reassessed the whole election campaign and came to the conclusion that Ukraine, US, Europe, China have almost not been an issue during this election campaign. To be honest, in the 5 campaigns I was leading the list of my party since 2006. It wasn't much better. So somehow the Netherlands is a bit inward looking when it comes to election campaigns. But that's not anyone's particular mistake. This is what happens collectively. then you're absolutely right. I was not a Eurosceptic, but I was on Europe when I came into office in 2010, very much focused on money, the currency, the euro and market. And what I came to the conclusion, particularly after the 2014 disaster with MH17 and the need for international cooperation, that the European Union also provides security. Not literally, because we have NATO for that, but the fact that you work together, that you have friends and allies, that you are not alone, as I explained in my short introduction, is a value in itself. Then about the elections, yes, you're right that the Geert Wilders party is anti-EU. I don't know what comes out of the forming of a new coalition, but I would say there is an overwhelming majority in the Dutch parliament. He got 24% of the vote, so 76% of the voters did not vote for him. And not all his voters are anti-EU. There were, for example, many voters from my party who switched the last night to his party because they were afraid that the Social Democrats would win the elections. And they didn't certainly vote for Geert Wilders because of his anti-EU position. So I think you could safely assume that if there would be a coalition with him, part of that coalition will still keep the Netherlands at the center of the European Union. I have no doubt. But of course we have to await whether my prediction will be the result, but given the positions of my party and the other two parties involved in the coalition talks now, if that leads to something, I think on Ukraine, on the EU, there will not be a big change. And this is also due to the Dutch political system. This polder model, where you fight the elections at the top of your lungs, and then you have to find compromises, and then you suddenly find out that the day-to-day realities are a bit less romantic than in the election campaign, which is good because it gives you a bit of a boring political system, but that is good for overall wealth, etc. And the Netherlands is one of the richest countries in the world, I think, because we have a bit of a boring political system. A bit like in Germany, you also have coalitions here, and it's also a bit boring. Well, not at the moment, I think, but at least normally it's just boring.
On the right, and then I'll pass the mic one line before. Go ahead.
Okay, hi, I'm Mansi. I'm also a Dutch student at the Hertie School.
What did you study before? Because I should have also asked you, but...
I studied at Leiden University.
Like me? And what did you study? International...
International studies, indeed.
Yeah. And then immediately you came here, or...?
I took 2 gap years to work in international institutions, etc.
Wow.
Thank you. Yeah, so following your long-standing career as a politician, teacher, and as a prime minister, and considering your visit to the Hertie School today, I wanted to ask a more general question. What have been your main takeaways that made you better at your job that you can give as advice to policy students?
Yeah, good question. Of course, the electorate has to decide whether I improved over the years. But let's say, in all humbleness, yes, of course, there are a few lessons. One is, for example, when you try to influence in your view right direction of European decisions, European Union decisions, that it helps to have a clear view on where you want them to end up, but also to leave a little bit wiggle room for compromise. And I learned that the hard way in 2015, when we said no fresh money to Greece. And I came out of that European Council, yes, hey, with new money for Greece. Why was that? Because at the end of the meeting, I came to the conclusion that if we would block it, we would be the only one. All the others said no fresh money for Greece would mean a collapse of Greece and a collapse, therefore, of the euro. And I thought, can we, being 4.9% of the whole Eurozone, or 6%, whatever, can we, it's a bit like when there's somebody on the wrong side of the road. No, I don't see one person driving on the wrong side. They're all driving on the wrong side. It's a bit like that. So can I take that responsibility? But I didn't leave any wiggle room before, so you learn from that. But the other thing I've learned is that at the end, based on all the assessments, you have to really take your decision on what is the best way forward. And there is that almost solemn moment when everybody in the room then looks at you and says, okay, what are we going to do? And then you have to give a clear answer. Otherwise, all the diplomats and people from the financial, from the finance department and others cannot take the lead in the international negotiations, and we always have to be early, because we don't have the size of France and Germany, but we do have the ambition to at least have more influence than our relative size is. And that means that you have to be early in the debates and discussions, and you cannot endlessly discuss it internally. And so that is also an important. And third, I think my ego is somewhat under control, but it helps, I think, because in this job you not always have positive press. And it helps if you are not immediately bogged down if there's anything negatively written about you. And when you go into politics, you really have to deal with that. That not everybody likes you. And if you want everybody to like you and love you, then go into show business, but not in politics.
Thank you very much. Up on the front.
Konrad Stockmeier, member of the Deutsche Bundestag, member of the Free Democratic Party, and on the Deutsche Bundestag Committee on European Union Affairs. Mr. Prime Minister, first of all, maybe an admittedly sort of non-diplomatic question. I'm very excited about your answer, how to deal with Hungary. And the second question concerning Russian and Chinese influence within the European Union via various channels, how to deal with that topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. On the first question, every country in the EU obviously has its positions, its views, etc. I think we have to engage more generally with Viktor Orban than we have done over the last couple of years. So we should have more discussions with him. I was happy that he was in Paris last Thursday. I spoke on the phone with him this weekend. He was in Buenos Aires on the occasion of the inauguration of the new president there. But I had an opportunity on Saturday night to speak with him in the run-up to the European Council this week. But generally, I think we should spend more time. This was an advice Angela Merkel gave me a couple of years ago when I hosted her farewell in Amsterdam. And she said, you might not always agree with him, but he has his own analysis of the situation. You can learn from that, and then you can engage with him. And if you don't, the others don't do that, then he gets isolated. So that's on Viktor Orban and the present Hungarian government. With the view of the European Council upcoming, with the problems now in the US, where the new fresh money for Ukraine has been blocked, at least for the moment. I hope it will get deblocked before Christmas or directly after. It's quite crucial, I think, this week that we do not have a double blow again against Ukraine. So we need to agree on the money part because that's crucial for them to move forward as a state, but also with the war effort. And secondly, that we move forward, and I think along the Commission lines, with the next steps on the enlargement process, so the Ukraine succession to the European Union, which again will take years before it happens, but this is about the next step, which will have a big impact in Kiev. Strict, fair, no shortcuts. I think they are ready for that next step. And then for Ukraine itself, it will be also symbolically an important moment. But if we don't do it, so that means engaging with Viktor Orban now in the run-up and during the European Council, and also with the others, because he is not the only one who has his views on this. Also others have their views, but I think there's a general understanding that we should take these two decisions. Yes, and then on China and on Russia, I was again impressed how quickly, how fast the EU closed the ranks last year in February. And so after that horrible night, 22nd on to the 23rd of February, when this unprovoked invasion happened of Russia into Ukraine. And that has not stopped. It's still there. But obviously we have to keep everyone focused, particularly after the 7th of October, the terrorist attack on Israel, which of course risks that we now have to divide our attention, but we still also have to make sure that Ukraine stays in full focus. And the same for NATO, I think, is very much united. Obviously, China, Russia, they all want to try to influence affairs. But this, and then I will stop answering to this question, and other questions will be raised on this. But I believe for the European Union to be more successful, also vis-à-vis Russia and China, we need our own assessment on what foreign policy-wise we should do. But here the problem, I think, is with Germany and France. Why is the problem with Germany and France? They are so big that they find it difficult to pool their foreign policy efforts. And I think if, as a European Union, we should have more impact on the world stage, it means particularly for Germany and France, but also for all the others, obviously, but particularly these two, because they are so much bigger than the other European member states, to really pool their foreign policy efforts and be more willing to agree at the European Union level. And that also means compromise making, so that collectively we have more impact. And collectively we are bigger than the US, and we are twice as big as China, and we are 10 times as big as Russia. But individually, Germany is the 5th economy in the world, is smaller than China and much smaller than the US, and obviously France then is the 6th biggest economy in the world, and therefore also smaller than China and the US. But when they pool their resources on foreign policy, and we do it as a collective 27, much more than we do currently, that's why we are pleading to let go of some of the veto rights in terms of foreign policy, for example, when it comes to sanctions, imposing sanctions and other issues in the foreign policy domain. But this is a long-standing plea for me. Europe has to be a player, and it risks to become the playing field. But we have to be a player on the world stage. Not China and the US, but also the European Union, and it can also only be if we pool our collective force. And by the way, we are, for the rest of the audience, we of course are colleagues in the same political family. My party is also from the liberal wing, like the FDP.
Thank you. I see lots of hands now, but I know the mic has traveled somewhere. So whoever holds the mic can grab it.
Yeah, hi. I'm Jitske. I'm not a Hertie student, but I'm a Dutch citizen, and I work in Berlin for an international organization. I wanted to ask you, after the fall of your first cabinet, you have historically not allowed the PVV from Geert Wilders to enter any coalition again. Now, in the new elections, your party changed their mind about this, and maybe thinking it would get more votes, but it actually had the opposite. Most of your voters tended to go towards the PVV, giving them a historical win. Now, we talked about mistakes earlier. Would you consider this to be a mistake and something to be lessons learned, especially considering the AfD in Germany also could get more recognition from the CDU, leading to not more CDU votes, but more AfD votes?
No, I was, and I still am, in favor of what my successor Dylan Jesselkus did in terms of not any longer excluding the PVV from being in a coalition. And why is that? Because in 2006, when I was leading the party, and in 2010, when we were the biggest, we did not exclude the Geert Wilders party from being part of a coalition. And we even drew him into a sort of coalition. He was not fielding ministers, but he was part of the majority. But then in 2012, when we had, the problem is his party is extremely left-wing on all the economic and financial issues. He is left of the Social Democrats in that sense, and that makes it always difficult for my party to compromise with him. And in 2012, we had to agree on extra savings because of the financial crisis. And after 7 weeks of negotiations and concluding on some very small steps of increasing the pension age, for example, he decided after 7 weeks it was too much for him. He didn't want to do it because he felt he would lose many of his left-of-center voters to other parties if he would do this. This was in 2012. And then I said, if at the height of a financial crisis, you are then forcing us to call for elections, which in our case, because the Netherlands is slow in organizing elections, takes 4 months, and then forming a new government. So that means 5-6 months easily, where you do not have a ruling coalition which is in full power. I find it unacceptable. So then I don't want to work with you anymore. But you cannot do this till entirety. This is now 11 years ago. So I found it totally logical for my new party leader to take the step to end this ban of him being part of a coalition. I think it's only. No, I think what happened in the last 72 hours in the election campaign is that people assessed who didn't want Frans Timmermans and the Social Democrats Green Party to become the biggest, that to prevent that, they were thinking it was my party who would then be the biggest, and somehow they made the calculation based on the opinion polls that they then had to vote for for the Wilders party. So, for example, my party, 10 or 20% of the voters switched overnight to Wilders, not because they liked his program, but because they wanted to prevent Timmermans from becoming prime minister.
Thank you very much. I think we have somebody else who has a mic.
Goedemorgen.
Goedemorgen.
My name is Dorian. I'm also a Dutch student at the Hertie School.
And where did you study history?
I did a master in public international law in Utrecht, and I studied my undergrad in Maastricht.
Great.
During your speech, you talked a lot about the importance of a cooperative EU working towards solving the migration crisis. Given the European story of solidarity and protection of human rights, my question is how to ensure that the approach to migration will also uphold the story and makes the EU live to its own standards.
For me, that's crucial. So everything we do has to be within all the international agreements and international law. So that's a given. At the same time, we cannot have everyone who is trying to get away from war or personal prosecution to come to the European Union, because we cannot handle those big amounts. For example, in my country, we can handle what we historically were getting in terms of asylum seekers, about 20,000, 25,000. If it was really a big year in terms of numbers of asylum seekers, it was 30,000. We could handle that. Now we are at 60,000. We cannot handle those numbers. In 2015-16, when the Syrian refugee crisis happened, calculations were going up to 90,000. Here in Germany, in that year, 2 years combined, it was almost 1 million. After that, we reshuffled das, the 5th of September 2015, Angela Merkel in that famous press conference, basically the year and a half after that, you saw to almost 1 million. And society cannot handle those numbers. So then you have to find ways to, within all the international agreements and laws, to find a way to make sure that people, yes, still can get away from war, etc. And that's why we started early 2016. We were holding the rotating presidency, and together with Merkel, we were starting to negotiate with Turkey, then still Turkey, now Turkey, whether we were able to come to something, and that led to this agreement between the EU, Turkey, and Greece on the Syrian refugees. And that's why, till today, they host about 3 million Syrian refugees in the south of Turkey. That is totally within all the international laws, etc. They are safe there. Maybe most of them had wanted to come to Berlin or Amsterdam, but that is simply not possible. But they are not any longer in Syria. So I was very happy with that outcome. And these very practical arrangements you sometimes have to make. They are not perfect. We are now negotiating with Tunisia, and I still am very much in favor to conclude a deal with Tunisia. It's not easy. And I know there are many critics of this, and the Commission is also working on Egypt. I'm happy they do that, because there is simply no alternative. We have to do that and absolutely constantly take into account and make sure that it is within the boundaries of international law, etc. Even the UK, you now see the debates in London, that Rishi Sunak does not want to step out of the European agreements on international law, and some of his party are forcing him to do this to make sure that he can send people to Rwanda. And he is working around that because he wants to stay within the boundaries. So this is for me sacrosanct.
Thank you very much. I think the mic is in the middle here somewhere, so please resolve who has the right to ask the question.
Yeah, Joop, also Dutch student, also former Leiden University.
How many Dutch students are here? And
Raise your hand if you're a Dutch student.
Why don't we replace this school to Amsterdam?
No, I think at this point every Dutch student has asked a question. Yeah, so also Leiden University, Campus De Hague.
Great.
Yes, very great. And you've been talking a lot about unity and cooperation within the EU, and that is where the European Union is the strongest, and has shown to be the strongest. But in that regard, also with populism on the rise, and with China, the US, changing circumstances, the unanimity rule in the EU has been a limiting factor as well. The Netherlands has never been the biggest proponent of dissolving that rule, but it seems with also the way you've been talking about Germany and France, how they have bigger influences, but we need to stick together. wouldn't it then make sense to dissolve that unanimity rule and go towards a more compromise-oriented but quicker approach?
Yes, on foreign policy. There, as I said before, I think we should have more, let's say, majority voting. But I would not be in favor of this on other issues. And why not? Because it has to do with the character of the EU. The EU is not a country. It is not even a confederation. It is a organization in which sovereign nations have decided to pull together, particularly on foreign trade and of course foreign trade, but also on issues of what now is being named the internal market. And coming from that, you have to agree on issues which are crucial for the functioning of the common market, including our common currency. But this is also the reason why I have always been against a European fiscal capacity outside what we have as the multi-annual financial framework, why I have always been against Eurobonds. Because then you get the Hamilton moment and in the US, where basically the power shifts from the states to what then in the US was already a confederation, which then became a federation in the late 18th century. And I would be against that, because we do not have... In the US, it was clear, you had a common frontier. There was a common story, where all these states coming out of French and British colonial situations, and even some Dutch. New York should be called New Amsterdam. But why all of this was happening. Here, we have a totally different history. And I don't think we should give up on the nation states, but I think we should pull together on issues where it is important. For example, foreign policy. Because if you will do what you suggest, you let go of many of these veto rights, you need also a stronger European Parliament with more power. And my assessment is that the biggest, let's say, feeling of people where their interests are taken care of is still in the national parliaments. Yes, you have the European Parliament, plays its role, is important, has more power than before. But in the end, it is the national parliaments holding to account the national governments when they take their positions in the European Union, where it should happen. That means sometimes a bit of a slow decision-making process, but with Ukraine we saw it can happen extremely quickly. So in the end, after long, for me myself, carefully thinking about it, I would still plead for the present structure, which can be updated on various issues, but not fundamentally in terms of creating that Hamilton moment or that confederal moment where we would become Belgium or Switzerland in terms of having a strong states within a confederation. I don't think that is the right way forward.
Thank you. Let me see if we have a question on the left side, because we've been leaning to the right in the question fielding. And don't hesitate, if you're not Dutch, you can also ask a question.
Goedemorgen again. I'm also Dutch.
I'm afraid. That's Finnish, isn't it?
I'm Vesna. I'm a first-year student at Hertie. And before I studied at EUC in Rotterdam. Witnessing polarization...
Could you, just for me, why did you go to this school? Because it has a fantastic reputation, but how did you hear about it and why did you take the decision to go here?
From another student who is also Dutch who studied here already, and it's a 2-year master. We don't have many in the Netherlands.
A 3-year master?
2-year.
2-year master, yeah.
So witnessing polarization and the rise of populism in countries like our own, but also in Sweden and in Hungary, what do you think the effect of this will be on European integration and cooperation? And also, in the light of this, what would you advise us as policy students to do?
Well, first of all, there is nothing against populism. All politicians should be populists, but there is the right and the wrong sort of populism, I would argue, from my point of view. Because we get our mandate from the people. So the people, populists, we need to be populists. But I think the centrist parties, like in Germany and the Netherlands and elsewhere, have of course to ask themselves the question, why is this happening? I think in the Netherlands, the shift is only limited. It really has to do, but this is my assessment and others might disagree with me. It really had to do with this question, which is always playing out in national elections. Which party will field the prime minister? And it was a contentious election because some of these party leaders were really very much, let's say, dividing the population. And I saw during the election campaign that Frans Timmermans, the leader of the Social Democrats, was really in the center and center-right, for the center and center-right voters, not acceptable. And he was very much acceptable. So this is good. I mean, it is great if you split the population as a politician, because then you have many voters who really love you. Take Maggie Thatcher in the UK. She was loved by her voters, but also hated by the Labour voters. So it's not bad for a politician to provoke a choice. Myself, I'm a brand of politician which has that to a lesser extent. I'm not really, in that sense, I think the type of politician which really provokes that much of tension on the one or the other side, more mellow. But with Frans Timmermans, it was happening. And that, I think, because... And originally, my party was having a lot of fun because of this. But I thought that this will, in the end, lead to the VVD becoming by far the biggest, because people will massively, in the center and center-right, switch to my party. But somehow, they made the assessment the last couple of days that it was the Geert Wilders party who could prevent them from becoming the biggest. So these things happen. It's not always the sort of undercurrent which is playing part here. But when populist parties become more popular, the question is not, why do people vote for these parties and can we tell them not to? The question then has to be, for the centrist parties, what are we doing wrong? What mistakes are we making? Why are we not able to present the alternative, which is, so my party and the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats, but also here in Germany. You can tell people you should not vote for the AfD. No, the question is, why are they not voting for the SPD, the CDU or the FDP? I think that should be the debate. And you need radical politics in the center, but still radical. And if it all becomes too mellow and people and parties start to look the same a bit, then you start to get a situation in which people might think, okay, we go to the more to the right or more to the left. We see the same in France. It will be very interesting to see what happens in 3.5 years with the French elections. The two traditional parties are not there any longer, the Gaullists and the Socialists. So it is the Macron party now in the middle, which still has to really get rooted in society. And then you have the extreme left of center or the very much right of center, Le Pen party. It will be interesting to see what happens in France over the next couple of weeks. But in the end, also in France, I hope the center will come up with a radical alternative so that people will then think, okay, that's where we should be, and not like you did in Germany. I mean, Angela Merkel for 16 years was able, in the center, to get to elections. Even once in 2013, she had almost an absolute majority, not in percentage, but in seats, because of the German system. She was close to an overall majority in 2013. And that is a die Miete, was the thing, I think the subline of CDU. Problem was that the FDP was then out of parliament because she gobbled up all the votes. But luckily you're back. You're back.
Thank you very much. Certainly is a challenge for all centrist parties. Mike is over here. Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Desi, and in light of the title of this lecture, I had a question of Europe as a global actor in a fractured world. And what are your thoughts on the recent case led by Oxfam and other organizations against the complicity of the Netherlands through the exports of firefighter jets, for example, and more, in the possible constant violations of human rights and international humanitarian law in Gaza? And additionally, perhaps, is it in the interest of Europe to recognize the state of Palestine, as Pedro Sanchez, the president of Spain, has recently done? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, well, this is a big issue. So this is all, of course, has to do with the post-terrorist attack, 7th of October. Our position is clear. We think Israel has the right to restore deterrence. And that means that they have to take out the threat from Hamas. But, there's a big but. International humanitarian law, restraint. The Gaza Strip is 40 by 20 kilometers, with 2.3 million people living there. And that means that when you take out Hamas, you have to do it in such a way that you do it with as limited as possible humanitarian casualties. And that's difficult. You cannot guarantee there will be none, but you have to do everything to limit the amount of people getting struck by the bombs, taking out the Hamas threat. Do not forget that Hamas is there with between 40 and 60,000 is the assumption now of fighters. So it is not a small threat. And of course, there's also the threat of Hezbollah, etc. If Israel cannot restore deterrence, it's the end of Israel. Because that will mean that they cannot stay there. And I don't think that is an acceptable outcome. What they cannot do is continue on the West Bank, what is happening there with the settler violence. We condemn that. The fact that there are even Israeli cabinet ministers seems to be making more or less facilitating that violence is absolutely unacceptable. But in the end, I believe Israel has to destroy deterrence and on international humanitarian law, whether they, yes or no, are violating it is impossible to assess. So we are not saying they are, but we ask them to do everything to prevent violating international humanitarian laws. Up to them to do that and also to show that they do. And obviously in the end there are also the international courts which will look into this later. Of course, now the question is, what next? Because you are talking about the separate state of Palestine. I know that some have recognized it. I think a recognition of Palestine should always happen in the context of a solution of the issue. We believe in a two-state solution, and it has to be a safe, viable, separate state of Palestine next to a safe Israel. And the only silver lining you could see in the present very bleak situation is that it hopefully also will lead Israel to the conclusion that yes, in the short term you need to restore deterrence. But in the longer term you cannot survive as Israel if you try to put the Palestinian issue away behind fences or whatever. There has to be a way for the two of them to live together. And everybody now is working, of course, on the humanitarian situation short term. I'm happy that Kerem Shalom is now being used. The scanners there, we provided them years ago because the Netherlands originally has this position between Israel and the Palestinian Authority where we try to have a strong relation with both. I was the first visiting Ramallah after the 7th of October. And then others followed, luckily, after that. So we try to maintain that balance. So short-term humanitarian situation, it has to massively improve, and access of goods and also fuel into Gaza is crucial. The day after, second issue. So Abbas clearly will not on an Israeli tank enter into Gaza. So how to deal with the situation in Gaza after the conflict, but also the long term. And particularly Jordan, but also Qatar and others are playing a very positive role here in thinking through what happens here. I was yesterday on the phone with King Abdullah of Jordan, and they're really taking the lead on this, and that's quite crucial. And we try to help wherever we can together, of course, with our partners.
Thank you very much. We're opening all the difficult questions as well. We have time for one more remark. So you have the mic in your hand. Then the concluding question is for you.
Okay, a lot of pressure. Basil from France, and I'm an EMPA student.
You're not from the Netherlands?
Exactly.
So then the question goes to you. No.
No, I have questions on a more personal note, but I think that will be of interest for many students in this room. I think you started in the private sector. So how and why did you come to politics in the first place? And what makes you stay for so long?
Yeah.
Maybe if I can add a concluding question as well. You have been the leader of the VVD youth organization from 88 to 91, and I suspect if you were a good leader, you criticized the establishment during this time. And I would like to know what you would tell your younger self today after the experience you've gathered in politics.
Yeah, good question. Well, I remember I led the liberal youth movement between 88 and 91, indeed. And I remember in 89 there were elections, and I made a mistake on radio by saying, well, mistake, I said what I said, but I said, you see that liberals in the Netherlands can vote for the VVD, my party, but some of them also end up with the Social Democrats, because my party is a split off from the Social Democrats after the war. And then the headline was, liberal youth leader advises people to vote Partij van de Arbeid, Labour Party in the Netherlands. And then my chair of the party called and said, I will personally make sure that you will never, ever get any position in this party. And I said, okay, I have to live with that, and hang up the phone. That was in 1989. No, I studied history, so I was always interested in business. So I tried to get a job in a big company. And I applied for Shell, Unilever, which are bigger companies in my country, and I, at the end, got a nice traineeship in Unilever. And my idea was to stay there till I would be 50 years old. So, but when I was 35, so after 10 years with the company, I got this opportunity to become junior minister for social affairs. This was after Pim Fortuyn was killed, just before the elections. This was the first real big change in the Dutch political spectrum, where a new party out of nothing became the second biggest party in 2002 and early this century. So I became junior, and I thought I'd do this for 4 years or 8 years, and then I returned to business. By the way, I came to the Department of Social Affairs thinking the quality will be less than in business, and they will work less hard. Fact is that the quality is better, and people work harder than in a big business. Why is that? Because you have that constant pressure from the press, from the media, but also from society to do the best you can. So the best people, luckily, not only go to big corporations, but also join, let's say, politics, and in this case, hoe heet het? Ambtenaren? Civil service. And and civil service. And they work harder than in a big company. So I remember that there was after a couple of weeks back in Unilever, they asked me, how is politics? I said, not as much as politics as in a big company. Because there is a lot of internal politics in a big company. So that was that. I loved the 10 years in Unilever. After 4 years, I so much loved politics that I didn't want to go back. And then in 2006, I opted to become leader. There was a big competition, a big fight. And in the end, I somehow grasped it. We lost the elections. And in 2010, we became the biggest. And the interesting thing about politics is that all these aspects I love. There is the debate part. There is how to get your message across in the media. But the main thing is that you can do something with all your irritants. So everything you hate about society, you can try to change. Of course, in a limited way, because it's always coalitions and compromises. So you cannot do whatever you want. You're not a dictator. No, to the contrary, it is you governing in tones of grey. But still, you can do more with what you think should change in society than when you just write letters to the newspaper. And so that's what I love about this. And as a hobby, I still teach 2 hours a week in a mid-level school in The Hague. And if NATO would not happen, which is still possible, then I probably will pick up something like that, because then you have also impact as a teacher on students, in particular students from a original migrant background. They are now all Dutch because they're 3rd, 4th generation, but still do not always make the choice to go to the highest level of education if they can, because at home the discussions are of a different kind than in the more traditional Dutch families. So there is still a lack of students within 3, 4 generations back, migrant background, who go to university than from, let's say, Dutch people who lived there since the 80 Years' War. And we have to change that. So that's why I like also that hobby. So what I would say to that I probably should not have made that mistake in that radio interview in 1989, 2 weeks before the elections. It was not very helpful for my party to suggest voters they can also vote Labour. It is not wise. I mean, in an election campaign, you vote for your party, not for the different one.
Prime Minister, thank you so much for the frank discussion and the very honest answer. It was a real privilege to have you with us today.
It was great fun. Thank you.